Hello, my name is Brian Potts, Chief Operating Officer with Third Stage Consulting Group. We've recently been talking about the dramatic changes to our global environment, specifically how it impacts businesses. We recently talked about the upswings and downswings on supply chains and demand. Now in this next series, we're going to be talking about the concept of working remote. A lot of organizations that haven't experienced this before are now being forced to basically have everybody work from home. Some of us in the consulting world and others have become accustomed to this, but a majority of organizations that haven't had to do this before are now in a position where they've got a remote workforce. How do you adopt, how do you, from a technology and organizational standpoint, how does this work? We're going to be talking today with Brian Lackaruba and Adam Cheatham on the Third Stage team on some best practice and ideas on how to get started with adopting to a mobile work environment.
Thanks, Brian. So I'll start. My name is Brian Lackaruba. I'm a manager at Third Stage, and I have been working across a variety of spaces in terms of areas like project management, business process management, business intelligence, managed major software implementations, done software selections, and worked in a whole lot of different areas, working with all types of different teams, and including teams that are dispersed geographically and pulling them together into executing projects.
And I'm Adam Cheatham, Director of Strategy Transformation at Third Stage. Been doing these types of remote workshops for quite some time, whether it be just collaborations or for full-blown workshops from a perspective of facilitating and gathering requirements, process mappings, and things like that. I have a lot of knowledge in transformation, whether it be local and domestic or global as well.
Great. Thanks again for joining. Maybe we can start off the first impact, and everybody has a different perspective on this depending on your experience, where you're coming from, but we can't ignore the human or change management impact. What do you guys think on that?
Absolutely. You know, this is a big shift for a lot of organizations in terms of the way you do work, and it's something that you've not had a chance to necessarily plan for. And of course, every organization is different in where you were on this. Some may have had offices in different locations that were already working remotely, but still had the area where people were used to being in the office together and communicating that way. So the key thing is really recognizing that these are people, these are humans who have been separated from the people they've been working with on a day-to-day basis, and that has an impact in terms of just their state of how they approach their work, as well as just a real impact in terms of the way they process and work through information. So what you need to do is ensure that you're thinking of that human aspect of it and recognizing the fact that just even if the work they do, you're technically capable of achieving it through the remote tools, that people are having to work different ways, and that's not going to happen just by default because you put them in front of say a Zoom recording and on online tools that they have access to. You need to work with them, facilitate sessions, and have discussions among the team, and bring them together in ways that help them to navigate the new work environment and to collaborate productively and effectively when the ways they have of connecting together are not there anymore.
Yeah. What about like the concept of self-discipline and time management? You know, people who are used to showing up at 8 o'clock and leaving at 5. This probably is I'd imagine throwing people off.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, you have impacts on an individual level for sure, of people who just have to get used to a new way of working, who are going to have different types of distractions. You know, some thrive on it. Some people find that having coworkers constantly interrupting could be something that gets in their way, and then when they're at home, they can focus better. Others are going to have they may have children at home, pets, other responsibilities, things that are going to get in the way, that they have to be able to give them the space to manage that, but be able to stay on top of it. And you know, the discipline of communication, not just on an individual level, but you know, that self-discipline as a team. How do you make sure that people, when they're not just say sitting next to each other or passing each other in the hallway, are actually going ahead and communicating the way that they need to do is critical. So one thing you can do, depending on the nature of the work and the availability of people, you may want to set up a daily check-in call. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be something where, and you don't want it to be something where people are spending, an hour plus every day, just kind of going through every little detail of what's happened. But often an ongoing call that's managed well, that still gives people a chance to connect as humans and to speak to each other, but gives them the opportunity to raise issues and bring about that communication that was happening before through other channels, giving them that space and time that's dedicated to it. It gives them a little, for those particularly who may not be as good at managing the time independently, a chance to have something to provide some of that discipline and accountability that they can manage themselves by having this kind of checkpoint that they have with the team.
Part of the realization that people are people, that needs to be taken into account here is that everybody also has their own individual needs, right? So folks that are glad to be having some quiet time and some time to put their heads down, that let them do that. And same way you manage other people who need more face-to-face connections, this might be a bit harder for them. And understanding what that balance looks like, the way that you manage people across remote tools will vary just as much as the differences that you manage them in the office. There are certainly a list of different types of distractions at home. That doesn't mean that there aren't distractions at work either. This isn't, if you treat this as an opportunity to lock down on people, I think you'll find that you'll have the opposite effect than you were seeking. But if you give people a little bit of space to find their norm and find their best way of becoming effective at home, and then taking advantage of when you find that, how to become more effective remotely is an important piece of the puzzle, because just as everybody else is different in the office, everybody else will be different at home, and the levels of comfort will be different.
Yeah, good point. So the question comes from this then, how do you, if you're not currently working in a environment that supported, say, a lot of remote work, maybe you've got some, but all of a sudden everybody's remote, from a technology standpoint, how do you jump into something like this? What's an approach? What are some considerations?
Yeah, you had to have the right tools, but that doesn't mean that you had to have every tool, right? It's the bigger the company that you are, the more likely it is you have an internal chat system already that can be utilized. A lot of those chat systems come with video conferencing capability, and conference calls as well are real good ones. Screen sharing is a definite advantage from a perspective of tools like Zoom, but you want to figure out what the multitude of levels of communication are that are available to you. Some people may not be comfortable having a video camera on in their own home. How many people do you know that have tape over their camera so that they don't want you to see them? There are a lot of concerns with that different people's levels of comfort will be different. They might be more effective over a chat. They might be effective over a conference call without a video. But for others, the face-to-face, being able to see people. I know for me, I'm a very social person. Seeing Brian and Brian here face-to-face, knowing that I'm at home and effectively quarantined, not because I must be, but because I'm choosing to social distance, is something that is important for me to be able to see and interact with the people that I work with. But at the same time, the chat tools might be a bit more effective for other people the same way. Some people prefer a text message, other people prefer a phone call. So you have to be aware of what technology you need, and the bigger of an organization you are, the more likely you are to need a multitude of tools to be able to handle those things.
Yeah, that's a good, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add that, it's something for managers to think about as well. As you have people, if you're not seeing work in the same way you were seeing before, you may think there's some kind of performance issue there, but it's also worth, before jumping to that conclusion, that you ask open questions and you have a real dialogue around what it is they need. There may just be certain aspects of their environment that they need help with. Some of it can be Some of it may be some of the people-oriented things we talked about. Some of it may be technology. You know, you see in this, for example, Adam and I have headsets that we rely on to be able to communicate effectively over the phone. Brian set up is one such that he doesn't need it. So everyone's got unique needs around what they have there. So make sure you're understanding that better and understanding how people are adapting to that work before you jump to any conclusions.
Yeah. Those are great comments. And before, setting widespread policies, make sure you consider the individual needs and concerns. You've got to set what the organization needs. And in terms of setting this up, the first step that, if you're a large organization, there's a number of complexities, reach out for help. I mean, this is something that Third Stage has helped companies with for years in setting up remote workforces without heavy investment. The first step is to look at what you've currently got. I mean, those that are on Office 365 probably have availability. Even if it's not in your current platform, you can bring in some tool sets. Most companies have access to something like a Zoom or a video conference unit where you can expand the license agreement on that pretty simply. It's just taking the initiative to do that. There's other things, if you're all of a sudden, customer service and sales are remote, you might need to expand on your CRM capability. That's a little bit more complex. And you might need to reach out for some help through a software evaluation in doing that, but it doesn't need to be a dramatic or expensive endeavor initially. You can also start the trend for defining what that future state looks like. If this is something that you're thinking about doing anyway, a system upgrade of any degree, this can be the first step of that.
I actually would like to pile onto that. For those, like, this might be an opportunity for people that are starting to think about experimenting with the remote workforce and figuring out what that means. Like, well, you now have the chance and not necessarily the option, right? But that's okay. That doesn't mean that you can't figure this out. It just means that you'll start to learn some of the things that you'll have to consider along the way and learn some of the weaknesses of this type of a thing by just ripping the Band-Aid off, being forced to try it out, and being able to say, this works really well for this type of person, this works really well for that type of person, and being able to create a management strategy that works for everybody.
And it's important to note here too that these are changes that very likely can be made without some massive investment in new technology or other types of big outlay up front. So you don't have to think of this as we need to go out and buy a whole bunch of new tools. And it may be the case in some scenarios you are going to have to buy things. You may need to extend licenses, but you also may find you have capabilities within some of your existing tools that you didn't know you had and you just haven't been leveraging. And the key is really understanding, what do you want to do? Sit down with your teams and go over what your processes and your communication need to look like in this new environment. Figure out what the needs are, see what you have available to you within the organization now, talk to your peers, talk to other leaders, and then figure out, what do we have capability to do versus where do we need to extend and to just take tools that we have at our disposal today and make better use of them or make different use of them.
Yeah, that's a good comment. We also want to consider, most of who we're talking to right now would be, organizations. We're talking to customer service, accounting, sales, payroll, whatever, back office operations. There are considerations of service and production environments. This is also an opportunity to look at building on your service management capability. Setting people in, and this is a little bit longer term of a transformation, but this is where companies are going in general. And talking about mobility, having laptops so that people don't need to come into an office and get a work order or a service order and then go back out, but those can be sent remotely to technology. So you actually don't even have to check in with the office to invoice and even receive product in some cases. So many different alternatives, and looking at your industry, your specific company, there's going to be different ways to handle that, but wanted to share that you're not alone, and that there is technology almost certainly to do whatever it is that you need to do. So have fun with it if that's possible. I understand it's a stressful situation, but you're not the only ones in this. Everyone's going through it, and this is a chance to differentiate yourselves too. And
I think it's a chance to connect a little bit differently, a little bit better when you start thinking about, like, people's families. They're home with their families. I mean, I don't know if you can hear my son crying right now, but it's a distraction for everybody, right? We all have different levels of distraction and different needs that we should be aware of. And you may learn that some of you share a commonality with somebody that you work with that you didn't necessarily know about.
Yeah, great comment. So I think in summary, this is look at this as like any obstacle or new thing. Look at this as an opportunity. What can you do with it? Make it work for you. Make it exciting. And it's no longer a case where if you're working from home, you got to hide everything and be in a corner. I mean, it's acceptable now to have kids screaming and dogs barking, and depending on what kind of a meeting it is, you can go to a different room. But it's more accepted now, and I think it's going to open us up as people a little bit. So really appreciate the inputs, and as always, Third Stage would love to talk to you more about this. If you want to ping any of us for ideas or input, please do. You've got our contact information, and I will look forward to talking to you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.